is because of there's a lot of research out there, and this chart sort of reflects the fact that what creates improvement in people. And there's a lot of evidence out there that the therapeutic relationship is responsible for about 30% of the variance in therapeutic outcomes. Okay, about 30%, which is about twice as much, we think, as any specific individual-based practice or the placebo effect. So what we've tried to do at MHA is to deconstruct what do we mean by the relationship. And this is just, you know, I have to tell you, I've got very little research behind this. This is Mark Reagan's and I brainstorming about how can we help our staff to sort of like look at what they do, because I'm convinced that the #1 reason why our staff are fearful of using data is because we have no language to talk about the data. And what we have to do is try to create a common language. I have always, like you, I think, been engaged in the magical thinking that if we just gave people the data, that we would then go to the people who are getting good outcomes and say to them, you know, I'm not getting very good outcomes in my data. You seem to be getting really good outcomes. Can you tell me what you're doing? That's probably not going to happen. And that's the assumption, by the way, in the education system. I just heard an article, a feature on NPR yesterday about 4:45 as I was sitting in the gym listening riding the recumbent bike and listening to NPR. And they had a story on where somebody exactly said that. This is how we expect our teachers to be able to improve the quality of their teaching. It's like, we'll just find out who's getting good results, who's getting good test scores, and then we'll ask the teachers who are getting the good test scores what they're doing so that the teachers who aren't getting good test scores can do that. I used to believe that that was the way that change was going to happen. I'm not sure that I believe that anymore. So this is our initial attempt to actually find a way to create a language between our PSCs and the other PSCs and their immediate supervisors, line supervisors, to talk about data. Okay? So these are the 3 domains that we're talking about: quality of life domains, type of recovery-oriented services that were provided, and whether the service was caretaking or growth-oriented. So whenever one of my staff does a service, they put into their progress note, they get drop-down boxes on each one of these things. So for example, quality of life, what the member is working on. So they have to select, during this interaction with the member, what was the primary thing that they were working on. I know, it's like you can work on a lot of things, but for the ease of data, and that's what Neil was referring to when he was talking about parsimony, we're just going to say, give me the #1 thing that you did in this interaction with people, okay? So these are the 13 domains that, and these have been vetted with our staff. These are the only 13 things that we could think of that they generally did with people. The quality of life goals that they were working on, right? Then what we do as staff, okay, now in your brochure, conference brochure, these are all defined, these 13 items. And I've trained my staff on what each of these items mean so that when they do a service, they are going to select one of these things. And if you look at these things, they sort of mimic the recovery process from when somebody comes in, and that's when you do welcoming and engagement, all the way down to at the end when they graduate and you're promoting self-reliance, separation from services, and graduation. So these are, again, the staff person selects one of these and it goes into the electronic health record. And then the final component that we're asking our staff to look at is whether the service that they provided was primarily caretaking oriented or was it growth oriented. Because we believe that there are a lot of, in a traditional system, we tend to emphasize the caretaking aspect rather than the growth and recovery oriented aspects. And I think that systems differ to the extent that they do one of those 2 things. And what we're trying to do is promote. And by the way, I'm not saying that caretaking is bad. There are times when caretaking is necessary. But I have to tell you, staff differ tremendously, I think, in their tendency to go to caretaking or to growth-oriented promoting services. I, as a person, tend to be way more caretaking than I should. I should be much more growth caretaking. I found this to be a flaw in my own approach with clients in those few times that clients are coming to me and talking to me. That those few times I actually experience people at that 6-inch level, which does happen occasionally, but not very often. So I want you to take a look at this just so you can see how we're gonna do this. So these 3 areas, you'll notice over there where it says service service content. Every month when you print out this report, for each of your clients, for each of your members, you'll see what was the #1 service activity that you did with that person, what was the second most service activity that you did with that person, what was the third most service activity. So for Charlie S., you'll notice that the #1 activity that was engaged in with Charlie was crisis intervention, and 40% of the time that was spent with Charlie by that PSC was spent on crisis intervention. About 25% were spent on safety net protective factors, and about 20% were spent on rehab and skill building. Now you can go and look in your conference brochure, and you can see the definitions of those things. But the point of this, and then by the way, about 80% was, where you look under care recovery ratio, about 80% was on caretaking and about 20% was on recovery. And the reason why, if you look over at Charlie, over the far left, you see his last 6 more scores, and the 3 from 6, 5, and 4 months ago were yellow, indicating that he was in the, I'm forgetting my own scale here, sorry, in the not coping, not coping successfully but engaged, then poorly coping not engaged, then poorly coping engaged, then he was high risk engaged, then he was high risk engaged, and last month he was at extreme risk. So you get a picture of Charlie's slow deterioration over time, and this gives you an actual snapshot over the last 6 months. But the important thing here is that you get much more of a picture. The PSC has something to talk about with their line staff supervisor. Is this making sense to people? Okay. So we're not absolutely committed to these categories. These are the categories that we've come up with because we think that the important thing here is to really push the quality improvement effort down to the staff level and get their buy-in investment. Our data will be a lot better if we're able to do this. It'll be a lot more valid and a lot more reliable, and we'll be able to actually convince our staff that we're not evaluators here to help you kind of thing, which is the way that they tend to look at us now. So thanks for your attention.